The world woke up to headlines screaming, "Israel attacks Iran." But behind those bold letters, behind the flashing images on your screen, hides a story most will never dare to tell. A story wrapped in decades of fear, silent deals, secret meetings, and the kind of power struggle that shapes the fate of entire nations. This is not just another conflict. This is a collision of history and ambition, of survival and dominance. What you're about to hear goes far beyond the missiles, beyond the politics, beyond the carefully scripted speeches. You're about to enter the mind of nations to witness the raw, unfiltered truth they never wanted the world to see. Because when a superpower strikes, it's not always about the target. Sometimes it's about what they're desperately trying to protect. And when fear begins to lose its grip, even the most powerful will gamble everything to maintain control. Tonight, I will take you behind the curtain, behind the headlines, into the very heart of why Israel attacked Iran. Not the version they want you to believe, the real version. And once you hear it, you will never see this conflict the same way again. Stay with me, because the truth begins right now. Israel's fear of Iran is not just rooted in weapons or military strength. It's something far more powerful, ideology. Iran represents a vision of the Middle East that completely opposes Israel's existence and its current dominance in the region. For Israel, Iran is not simply another nation with military capabilities. It is a revolutionary force that inspires resistance across the Muslim world. Iran's growing influence means that more nations, more groups, and more people begin to challenge Israel's authority, its policies, and its very foundation. This is not a war of missiles alone. It's a war of ideas, of hearts, of loyalties. As Iran strengthens its ties with nations and movements throughout the Middle East, it builds a web of influence that threatens to encircle Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, groups in Iraq, Syria, and even inside Palestine. All are directly or indirectly supported by Iran. This network creates constant pressure on Israel's borders, leaving it feeling increasingly cornered. Every new Iranian alliance chips away at Israel's control, turning regional dynamics against it. Israel has long benefited from being the dominant power in a divided Middle East. But Iran is slowly changing that game, fostering unity among groups that share its vision of opposing Western-backed dominance. What terrifies Israel even more is that Iran's message resonates with oppressed people far beyond its borders. The oppressed see Iran as a symbol of defiance against Western occupation, colonialism, and injustice. This gives Iran a soft power that no missile can match. As Iran's reach grows, Israel fears losing not just its military edge, but its psychological advantage. The narrative of being the eternal victim, surrounded by hostile forces, begins to weaken as more voices rise against it. This ideological rise of Iran challenges the very identity of Israel as the sole dominant force in the region. It forces Israel to act, to strike preemptively, not just to destroy weapons, but to crush a growing idea. Because when an idea spreads, borders mean nothing. That's the war Israel fears the most. Israel's deepest fear has always been Iran's nuclear ambition. This is not just about one bomb or one facility. This is about survival. In the heart of Israel's leadership, there exists a constant anxiety that if Iran ever crosses the threshold of becoming a nuclear-armed state, the entire balance of power in the Middle East would tilt forever. Israel has lived for decades under the security of its own unspoken nuclear capability, giving it silent dominance over its neighbors. But the moment Iran steps into that club, Israel loses its ultimate leverage. The concept of deterrence changes. For the first time in its history, Israel would face a rival capable of matching its most secretive, most powerful threat. It is not just military destruction they fear. It is the destruction of psychological superiority. The very notion of being untouchable vanishes. Countries that once hesitated to challenge Israel might find new courage under the protective umbrella of a nuclear Iran. And beyond the politics and strategies lies the ultimate terror, the fear of annihilation. The historical trauma that shapes Israel's national psyche makes the idea of a nuclear Iran unbearable. Israel doesn't see Iran's nuclear program as a distant possibility. It sees it as an approaching nightmare. Every enrichment facility, every centrifuge spinning in Iranian labs is viewed not just as technology, but as a ticking clock counting down to disaster. This is why Israel has repeatedly carried out covert operations, assassinations, sabotage within Iran. It is a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable, because once Iran reaches nuclear capability, Israel's long-standing military dominance dissolves. The region enters a new era where Israel no longer dictates the rules, but instead must live in constant negotiation with a rival holding equal power. That is a reality Israel refuses to accept. Iran's strategy has never relied solely on its own borders or conventional military strength. Instead, it has built a complex web of proxy forces across the region that serve as both a shield and a sword against its adversaries, especially Israel. Through groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militias in Iraq, and influential ties in Syria and Palestine, Iran has effectively surrounded Israel with hostile forces capable of striking from multiple fronts. This network allows Iran to apply constant indirect pressure on Israel without engaging in direct warfare, making it extremely difficult for Israel to respond without escalating into a broader regional conflict. These proxies serve multiple purposes. They drain Israel's military resources, keep its population under constant fear of attacks, and force it to remain on high alert along several borders at once. Hezbollah alone, heavily armed and deeply entrenched in southern Lebanon, represents a significant military threat. With its stockpile of thousands of missiles capable of reaching deep into Israeli territory. For Israel, the danger is not just in the physical weapons, but in the unpredictability of these proxy forces. Iran can activate or intensify their operations based on shifting geopolitical needs, turning them into strategic. This creates a state of permanent tension for Israel, where peace can be shattered at any moment from multiple directions. The longer Iran nurtures these alliances, the more deeply embedded its influence becomes in the heart of the Middle East political and military landscape. For Israel, dismantling these networks is nearly impossible without igniting a war that could spiral out of control. Every move against one proxy risks triggering responses from others, creating a dangerous domino effect. This sophisticated proxy strategy allows Iran to project power far beyond its borders, keeping Israel trapped in a cycle of defense and retaliation. Israel knows that as these alliances grow stronger, its own strategic position weakens. The fear is not just of one enemy, but of an expanding circle of hostility that could one day close in with overwhelming force. That looming reality pushes Israel toward preemptive actions, desperate to break the growing chain before it becomes unbreakable. For decades, Israel has relied heavily on its close relationship with the United States and the broader Western alliance to maintain its military, economic, and diplomatic superiority. But the world is shifting. Emerging global alliances are redrawing the power map, and Israel sees the danger in these shifting sands. The rise of blocs like BRICS, where Iran finds a welcoming seat alongside major players like China, Russia, and others, presents a serious challenge to Israel's historical position. Iran's deepening ties with China promise new economic lifelines, advanced technology, and strong diplomatic support. Russia's partnership offers military collaboration, intelligence sharing, and geopolitical leverage, especially in sensitive regions like Syria. Even within the Arab world, where Israel once counted on divisions and hostilities to keep Iran isolated, new understandings are beginning to form as some Gulf nations reassess their long-term interests. The normalization agreements that once seemed to secure Israel's place in the region now face the complexity of a global environment where power is becoming more The United States, once the unquestioned protector of Israel, is facing its own internal challenges and global fatigue, forcing it to reassess how deeply it wants to entangle itself in Middle Eastern conflicts. As American priorities shift towards the Pacific, domestic issues, and economic competition with China, Israel fears being left exposed. The growing cooperation between Iran and non-Western powers offers Tehran a shield against Western pressure, sanctions, and isolation. The more Iran integrates into these global partnerships, the harder it becomes for Israel to rally international support for aggressive actions. Every new diplomatic handshake between Iran and a global or regional power chips away at Israel's ability to control the narrative and isolate Iran diplomatically. This growing global realignment threatens to weaken Israel's traditional alliances while empowering its greatest adversary. Israel is not just a loss of military advantage that Israel fears, but the loss of its privileged global status that has for decades provided it with cover for its actions. As this new world order takes shape, Israel sees the window closing, pushing it toward desperate, risky decisions to disrupt Iran's momentum before the balance tips too far. Inside Israel's borders, beneath the surface of military power and global diplomacy, lies a growing storm of internal political chaos. Over the years, Israeli leaders have faced increasing pressure from scandals, corruption cases, judicial battles, and mass protests that have divided the population like never before. The once united narrative of national survival is now being eroded by fierce political rivalries and public dissatisfaction. As the domestic situation becomes more volatile, leaders often turn to a familiar and dangerous tool: external conflict. When the streets fill with protesters demanding justice, or the government teeters on the edge of collapse, nothing redirects public anger faster than the threat of war. A strike against a powerful enemy like Iran instantly shifts the national focus from domestic failures to national unity. Suddenly, criticism fades, the opposition softens, and the people rally behind their leaders, driven by fear and patriotism. This is not a new strategy. History is filled with examples where governments under internal pressure have sought to manufacture external enemies to strengthen their grip on power. In Israel, where the collective memory of existential threats runs deep, this tactic carries immense emotional weight. Leaders know that invoking the specter of Iranian aggression can silence dissent, unify fractured political factions, and buy time to navigate internal scandal. Each missile launched, each military operation carried out is not only aimed at Tehran, but also at stabilizing shaky ground at home. The leadership plays a high-stakes game, hoping that external aggression will outweigh internal grievances, even as it risks dragging the entire region into a wider conflict. But as this cycle repeats, the stakes grow higher. The public may rally temporarily, but underlying divisions remain, simmering beneath the surface, ready to explode once the external threat fades. For Israeli leaders trapped in political turmoil, striking Iran becomes a calculated gamble. It is a dangerous attempt to transfer the battlefield from the chaotic halls of domestic politics to the global stage, where fear can be more easily controlled than discontent. In doing so, they risk lighting a fire far greater than the one they seek to extinguish at home. In modern warfare, the battle is not only fought with missiles, drones, or soldiers. It is fought in headlines, on television screens, across social media platforms, and within the minds of billions around the world. Israel has mastered the art of controlling global narratives, often presenting itself as a nation under constant threat, defending its right to exist against relentless enemies. But as Iran rises, that carefully crafted image begins to crack. Iran's growing presence on the global stage threatens to expose a different side of the story, one where Israel's actions are increasingly seen as aggressive rather than defensive. The more Israel strikes preemptively, the harder it becomes to maintain the image of victimhood by attacking Iran and framing it as a rogue state pursuing nuclear weapons, sponsoring terrorism, and destabilizing the region. Israel attempts to keep international sympathy firmly in its corner. It seeks to reinforce the idea that any military action taken against Iran is an act of self-defense, not aggression. This narrative is crucial to securing continued Western support, financial aid, advanced weaponry, and diplomatic protection, especially in institutions like the United Nations, where global opinions are constantly shifting. But Iran's expanding alliances and its growing influence in non-Western media challenge this monopoly over the narrative. New voices, new media outlets, and emerging powers are telling stories that don't align with Israel's long-standing portrayal. As these alternative narratives gain ground, Israel fears losing its grip over global public opinion. If the world begins to see Iran not as the sole villain, but as a nation resisting Western and Israeli dominance, the moral high ground that Israel depends on starts to erode. Israel understands that perception shapes policy. If global sympathy shifts, even slightly, it could weaken international sanctions against Iran, reduce military cooperation, and increase diplomatic isolation for Israel itself. Every strike against Iran is not just a military operation, it is a media campaign designed to dominate headlines, frame the conflict, and sway international opinion before alternative perspectives take hold. This battle for the world's sympathy may be the most important war Israel is fighting, because once the narrative slips away, so too does the silent permission of the world to continue its policies unchecked. So now you see the full picture. This is not just a simple war between two nations. This is a chessboard where every move carries the weight of history, fear, pride, and survival. Israel's strike on Iran is not a sudden reaction. It is a desperate act born from years of anxiety, growing pressure, and shifting power. Iran's rise threatens not only Israel's military dominance, but its entire identity on the world stage. the fear of losing nuclear superiority, the tightening grip of Iran's proxies, the shifting global alliances, the boiling political crisis within, and the constant battle to control the narrative, all have pushed Israel to the edge. And when a nation feels cornered, it lashes out. But every strike carries a price. The region sits on a knife's edge, where one wrong move could ignite flames that burn far beyond borders. The world watches, holding its breath as these two forces collide. The real reason behind Israel's attack on Iran is not written in headlines. It's written in history. Fear and power. Thank you for staying with me until the end. The world is changing right before our eyes. May you always seek truth with courage, question the narratives with wisdom, and never stop learning. Good luck, and may peace guide your heart.